installment of Remote Sensing of Rivers from the University of Wyoming Geography Department. This is Ryan Richardson, the president of the Fluvial Remote Sensing Lab at the University of Wyoming. And I'm here today to present a brief presentation on high resolution, cost effective grain size mapping with structure from motion, testing new methods to better quantify salmonid spawning habitat. This presentation was originally given at 2016 River Restoration Northwest Symposium, and I had the pleasure of being a speaker at that conference and just want to try to spread the word more about what research we've been doing at the University of Wyoming and try to get our research out there so other people can use it. I'd like to take this time to thank my co-authors and collaborators on this project. Carl Legleiter, the head of our Fluvial Remote Sensing team, who is no longer at the University of Wyoming, but is now at the USGS. Toby Stegman, who is a fellow graduate student who's helped immensely with this project and has really contributed greatly into the methods that we're using here. And Lee Harrison from NOAA, who has helped supply funding as well as guidance and understanding the different systems we're working in on the Merced and the Tuolumne rivers in California. So let's jump into it. First and foremost, we need to answer the question of why do we care about grain size? Obviously, grain size is a major characteristic that defines habitat along with depth and velocity. These are some of the major characteristics that help us define what type of habitat we see in the natural environment in river settings, as well as the fact that this is highly important information for us to gather in order to quantify and model salmon spawning habitat. It's also really important for if you're trying to model sediment transport or conduct hydraulic modeling if you're trying to figure out what the roughness is of the river that you're working with. So all important features across the board, from ecology to fisheries biology to hydraulic engineering. So let's take you to our study sites. We have been working on the Merced River in California. We have two different areas in which we're working. One is in the lower Merced, below some dams. And this is actually within a restoration reach where they've used gravel to create spawning gravel bars aimed at increasing the amount of spawning habitat for native salmonids. On the upper Merced, this is above the reservoirs, it's in a free-flowing system, and it is totally unmanaged in terms of gravel augmentation. So we're trying to really test out this technique in kind of two different settings, one in a river restoration setting and also in a natural reach. We had over 14 bars where I mapped using structure from motion, a basic photogrammetry technique that uses photos to create high density point clouds for both the restoration reach and the natural reaches. And as well as the fact that I also collected a great deal of information about grain size from each of these locations. The goal of this whole project is to try to quantify the amount of spawnable gravel that's present within both of these areas, as well as just get a better understanding of how grain size is distributed spatially inside of a watershed. So to give you a little bit of a background, you probably have noticed that there's an increasing amount of access and papers that are really focusing on high resolution point clouds. This is because of the new techniques and technology that has emerged over the past 5 to 10 years, including the access of terrestrial laser scanners, multi-beam sonar, and for this project, structure from motion, which is a really amazing technique. And if you want to know more about it, there'll be other videos as well as some more tutorials that we'll be showing about structure from motion. But the other thing that people don't think about too is that we have come a long way in developing statistical toolkits that are specifically designed to handle these point cloud analysis. So for example, we have a few different toolkits that have just come on the line, one from Daniel Bascome in Python, as well as another toolkit called TopCat, which is the Topographic Point Cloud Analysis Toolkit. But what we're going to actually focus on today is how we can use these existing techniques to map grain size from a structure from motion derived point cloud. So this is a general overview of the workflow that we've been utilizing. You can see it's kind of split into 3 different sections here. So if you start off over here on the left-hand side, this is our structure from motion workflow that goes through the basic tools that you're going to need to create that high-resolution point cloud. So if you're not familiar with structure from motion, I definitely think you need to check out some more literature on it. But the end result is we're going to create a dense point cloud and calculate roughness using a statistical toolkit called TopCat. The other thing we really need to focus on is over here on the right. We're going to utilize a digital gravelometer software workflow that was also developed by Daniel Bascome from the USGS that takes images, individual images, and can create a grain size distribution using a GUI in MATLAB. And I've actually heard too that it's now also available in Python. So get excited. So once we have both roughness from our point cloud and our grain size information, we're going to bring these 2 data sets together, and we're going to create a linear regression to relate roughness within the point cloud to grain size, and eventually output a grain size map. So let's talk a little bit about roughness and what I'm talking about when I refer to roughness. So you can think about roughness and an idea is if you were to take your hand and rub it over top of one of these point clouds, how rough is it actually going to feel? A statistical tool, a statistical way to measure this that we've chosen is using the detrended standard deviation of elevation. So you can think about this as how much variance in a pixel is there in elevation. And what we're finding is that there's actually a strong correlation between the amount of variance or roughness within each pixel and the grain size that we find in that. So in order to process this, we're using one of these new statistical toolkits called the Topographic Point Cloud Analysis Toolkit, or TopCat. It was developed by James Brasington in 2012. There's a reference at the end of this presentation that you can take a look at his article. But what's really cool about TopCat is that it locally detrends your point cloud and is able to do so that you can get a much more accurate representation of what the variance is at different spatial resolutions. So you can process this point cloud on a variety of different resolutions, and this is going to be really important for trying to link that to grain size, because roughness is a spatially dependent statistical measurement. So trying to figure out what spatial resolution is most relevant to grain size is part of this project and part of what we're working on. So down in the bottom right over here, we can see this is our structure from motion point cloud of a bar on the lower Merced. So this is a constructed bar. It's a river restoration project to increase salmon spawning habitat. And we can see the outputs from TopCat at different spatial resolutions. So what you can see here is the areas in red are much lower values for roughness. And as we move into yellow, we get higher values. And the blue that really stands out in these diagrams is really, really high measures of roughness. And what I'm going to show you is that we're going to be able to utilize all of these different spatial variations of resolutions of roughness to try to calibrate our models for detecting grain size. Check out the area in blue though and kind of look back to the structure from motion point cloud. What we can find is in areas where we have significant vegetation, you're going to have really high measurements of roughness. So it's important to find field sites and study areas that limit the amount of vegetation, and we're going to see more of these effects later on as we move on in this presentation. So now that we've calculated roughness for our field site, we also need to get grain size information that we're going to be able to link to that roughness statistic. So like I said, we're utilizing a GUI that was developed by Daniel Bascome from the USGS. This is his digital gravelometer software toolkit. We decided to use MATLAB. We're a much more MATLAB friendly lab. But I just heard recently that it's also now available in Python, so try to hunt that down if you're a Python user. But effectively what this toolkit allows us to do is we take photos in the field of a plot of grains, and it will actually automatically process these and spit out a grain size distribution, which you can see over here where my laser pointer is. This has really been proven effective over a wide variety of grain sizes, and has actually been used in thin sections too. So if you're a typical standard geologist, you're familiar with the thin section. These have actually been used in thin sections to calculate crystal size as well, using these same techniques. There are problems with it. One of the major ones is if there's a large amount of sand within your image, it can be difficult to accurately extract the grain size distribution. As well as I've said earlier, if you have a significant amount of vegetation, it's also going to be really difficult. So for each one of our gravel bars, like I said, I have 14 gravel bars. We collected over 12 to 18 locations on each of those bars where we measured grain size distribution. And we RTK GPS the corners of each of those plots that we did so that we can then compare it to the roughness pixels that we're calculating with TopCat. So just want to point out something that is really important for when you're doing this analysis. You need to be able to capture the full range of grain sizes that are present on your bar. So in this case, this is one single bar from the Upper Merced Reach where we have a very wide range of grain sizes. So if you're trying to build a model that's going to accurately estimate grain size, you need to make sure that you're collecting the proper range of data you need to build those regressions. So this is an example of a single regression analysis that we're conducting from one of our field sites. So you can see here, we're just doing a simple linear regression. We're fitting the D50 in millimeters, or the 50th percentile for grain size, with on the y-axis, and on the x-axis we have the detrended standard deviation of elevation, which is a mouthful, and it is basically a measure of roughness. So we have roughness on the x-axis and grain size on the y, and we're finding that we have pretty strong correlations when we plot these out with these linear regressions. We're going to do this because we can actually get the full distribution of grain size. We're going to repeat this analysis over multiple resolutions of roughness that we've calculated with TopCat. And we're going to also use a multitude of percentiles for grain size, ranging anywhere from the D10 all the way up to the D90, to get a better idea of what we can actually quantify with an estimate using this technique, and see which resolutions and which grain sizes are most effectively estimated using these techniques. So let's look at one single gravel bar. This is that Lower Merced bar number 3 that we were looking at in some previous slides. What you're going to see here is the R² value, or the goodness of fit for our linear regressions, is on the y-axis. And on the x-axis, we have the different grain size percentiles that we're measuring. The different color and symbols represent the different resolutions of our TopCat roughness model. So what we can see here is that our higher resolution model is a much better predictor for grain size when we're looking at a single bar. And we're getting upwards of 0.78 for the D90 and around 0.65 for the D50 when we're conducting this analysis, which is pretty good when you're trying to look at a model for a single bar. But what I want to really show you is when you take a larger data set, we can get much better results. So when we merge the data sets from all 14 bars, what we actually can find is we get a much stronger goodness of fit. So we're getting upwards of 0.85, 0.87 for our R² values. But what I want you to notice is it's no longer that high resolution roughness roughness map that is really getting us the good results. We're actually seeing a complete flip when we merge the data sets, and we're finding that the coarser resolutions are giving us much stronger results. And this was surprising at first. So this is all great, but what can we actually do with this? So this is an example of what we can actually get out of this analysis. This is one of the bars, I guess, again, on the lower Merced, it's bar number 6. You can see to the right is our structure for motion point cloud over here. And then what I've done is I've taken just, for example, I took the D84 linear regression that we calculated from the previous slide, and I applied it throughout the entire roughness map that we created with TopCat at a 0.75 meter resolution. So we're getting, and that regression had a R-squared value of 0.85. So roughly explaining 85% of the relationship between grain size and roughness. We're able to account for 85% of the variance. And so this is a really useful tool. We're able to map grain size on a sub-meter resolution throughout our entire field site. One thing I want to point out, again, these are areas over here where we have vegetation that I've tried to crop out most of, but when we actually look over here in our grain size map, we are still calculating higher amounts or higher size classes for the D84 because of the influence of vegetation. So this is just another slide showing the limitations of this technique and something to keep in mind when you move forward. So I know some of you might be thinking, oh, that's great. You were able to map grain size on individual bars. That's really not helpful for river restoration or watershed scale analysis. And so I want to challenge that idea with the work of my colleague Toby Stegman, who is a recent graduate from the University of Wyoming. And this is his project that he focused on for his thesis in Idaho on a restoration project on Teton Creek, just outside of Driggs. And what we can see here is that he's effectively mapped, using structure for motion, about 3 kilometers of river channel. And this is an entire restoration project that in the summertime is dewatered from overuse, over-allocation of water resources for this stream. And what we're actually finding is he's able to make continuous grain size maps for the D50 and the D84 and roughly account for 80% of the variance using his linear regressions that he was calculating for his work. So this is a really useful tool for river restoration practitioners, as well as any river scientist who's interested in trying to calculate and map grain size. So in conclusion, Structure for Motion is an inexpensive and powerful tool that can not only provide high-resolution topographic data, but also provide grain size information. This tool has the ability and potential to be implemented over a wide array of river restoration projects and can map sub-meter grain size, which will hopefully allow us to have more quantifiable analysis of habitat as well as roughness measurements for hydraulic modeling. So with that, I would love to answer any questions in the comments below or shoot me an email at the contact information to the right here. Check me out on LinkedIn if you're interested in seeing what current projects we're working on. Take a look at our fluvialremotesensing.org website. This is our laboratory website where we post all the latest and greatest research projects that we're working on here at the University of Wyoming, and also have sometimes free code that's available to help you along in your river restoration or river science needs. Take a quick moment to thank the funding sources for this, including NOAA, the Geologic Society of America, University of Wyoming, and NASA. So thanks a lot, and I hope you enjoyed this. Take a look at the references if you have any questions, and I hope to answer more questions in the comment section. Thanks again.